Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're starting off a new weekly guide series called The Art of War. The goal of these guides is to cover the battle aspects of the game Total War 3 Kingdom, which constitute about half the game. So that means this will be a very long series, and it will hopefully cover a multitude of topics ranging from beginner concepts like what constitute an army, to more advanced ones like how to correctly micro certain army setups on the battlefield. So there will be something for everyone, despite your own proficiencies with the game. Now, in this very first episode, we are going to explore the concept of army composition by first defining what an army is in the game before looking at what constitutes a good army. Our focus for right now will be on the Han army compositions, as the Han subculture makes up about 80% of the playable factions, but rest assured, we will eventually cover all the subcultures in the game in future parts. So, in the game, an army is made up to 3 generals. For example, here we have an army setup containing the generals Cao Cao, Xia Houdun, and Guo Jia. Now, this is just an example, and the armies can have 2 generals or even the bare minimum of just 1, but ideally, you want to always have 3, because while an army can just be a single general, the goal of most armies in the game is to recruit units to fight for you. And in the game, each general can only recruit up to a maximum of 6 units, which are called their personal retinues. Therefore, a fully recruited army of 3 generals can have a total of 18 units. And for each missing general, you are going to be losing out on 6 potential units. And in addition to just having extra units, by having different classes of generals represented in the army, you will gain access to different types of units that belong only to those certain classes. For example here, Cao Cao belongs to the commander class, which has access to melee cavalry units. Xia Houdun is a champion, therefore he has access to polearm units, while Guo Jia is a strategist, with access to range units. So running armies with less than 3 generals will also reduce the variety of units made available to you. On top of all this, generals all have individual skill trees, personal background titles, and traits that can all grant the entire army different kind of bonuses. So by having less generals, it means you are giving up on bonuses you could have acquired. And in particular, the first general in any given army, or the general in the leftmost position, is automatically deemed the commanding general. So in addition to the typical own army or own retinue bonuses, they will also be able to pass on any bonuses that are labeled with the conditional statement of when commanding. And there happens to be exactly 11 skills that will provide some sort of when commanding bonuses, and they are shown here. Now, while none of these skills are bad, some of them are clearly worse than others. For example, all the morale bonus skills have been heavily nerfed since launch, when they were given originally 10 points of morale, but now currently only gives 2 points of morale. So they're no longer as important. Instead, I believe consideration, flexibility, reach, and precision are probably the 4 best when commanding bonuses in the game right now. So let's isolate these 4 and look at which classes of general actually have access to these skills on their skill tree. Right off the bat, we can notice that general classes who share the same color as the skill always have access to it. And in addition, some of these skills are shared between multiple classes in the case of flexibility, reach, and precision. And even though these 4 are probably the best bonuses available, there is still a separation of quality among them, as consideration is probably only great in the late game when you can afford to have multiple armies on the field to reinforce each other in massive battles. Flexibility is amazing in the early game when replenishment is hard to come by, but it will fall off in the late game when replenishment rate is capped at 50%. Precision never falls off, but it is only effective for range-focused army compositions, which leaves us with reach, as I believe Reach provides the best win commanding bonus in the game by providing 25% extra campaign movement range on the campaign map. This extra mobility is great for so many situations, as it will save you time, allow you to chase down enemy armies, allow you to run away from enemy armies, and provide the extra movement to trigger certain army stance that use army movement, like encampment or ambush. So ideally, you always want your army to have reach in the commanding officer position, so that means you need a vanguard, a champion, or a strategist in the commanding general position. Now, there are always exceptions to all rules, but optimally speaking, this is highly recommended, especially if you're new to the game. Speaking of exceptions, there is also additional layers to consider, as your units in the game can also gain access to formations that can vastly improve their battle capabilities, and the only way to unlock these formations for the whole army is to have either a commander class general as your commanding general, or by having a strategist in any position within the army. And since we already established that commanders do not have access to the reach ability on their skill tree, this just means if we want the best of both worlds, as in if we want the best win commanding bonus and access to all the formations for the entire army, we simply need to have a strategist in all armies. And that brings us to the concluding point in our very first Art of War episode. Given all these information, how many different army compositions exist in the game, and how many of these possible compositions are optimal? So first off, there are 5 distinct Han general classes, namely champions, commanders, sentinels, strategists, and vanguards. So given that each army is composed of 3 generals, with the first position being unique, as it will determine who the commanding general is, we have a grand total of 75 distinct army compositions in the game. And since we established that we would ideally want reach in all our armies, we can take away all the army compositions that are not commanded by a champion, strategist, or vanguard, which leaves us with 45. Then, since we want to make sure we have access to all formations, we can also strip away all the compositions here that do not include a strategist, and now we're left with only 25 quote-unquote optimum army compositions. Now, we threw in the air quotes around optimum here because many of these army compositions here are really far from optimum. For example, an army of 3 strategists, or even worse, an army of vanguard strategists would perform terribly in many situations. And as we mentioned earlier, there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, so even some of these army compositions that we have grayed out here are still viable strategies for your gameplay. You just need to understand what these armies are built for. For example, Triple Vanguard is a legitimate army composition for certain situations, as is Sentinel Strategist. So in future episodes, we're going to continue to provide more explanations around these concepts and introduce other new ones like own retinue bonuses to discuss how we will build our army composition from a unit perspective. But for now, a few good baseline to take away from this episode is that you should 1. Construct armies using all 3 general slots. 2. Try to get the reach skill and other useful win commanding skills onto your commanding general, who must occupy the first slot in your army. And finally 3, always try to include a strategist into your armies to gain access to formations for your entire army. So this is going to wrap it up for this episode of Art of War. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned next week when we will expand on what is covered here today, as we will try to find what is the best army composition in the game. Until then, bye!